As we mentioned earlier, today is President Biden's final day overseas, where he's wrapping up his whirlwind visit to Scotland for the Global Climate Summit. He's set to hold a news conference this afternoon before heading back to Washington. Now, the president says the U.S. is ready to lead by example when it comes to addressing the climate crisis, and he spoke a short time ago at a meeting with other world leaders in Glasgow.
There is an urgent need for infrastructure development in countries, infrastructure that when they build it, prioritizes the fight against climate change from the moment the spade goes in the ground and jumpstarts the green economic growth. That's what I'm focused on in the United States, but it isn't just an American project. It's work we all have to do and we all are doing around this table.
So Weijia Jiang is here to discuss. She is traveling with the president in Europe. Weijia, as we mentioned, the president's going to be speaking later on today at a press conference. Do we have any idea what he will be speaking about?
Well, I mean, it just depends on what he'll be asked, right? And I think that a lot of reporters, even traveling here with him here in Scotland, have plenty of questions about what's unfolding back home because his own climate agenda for the U.S. is in jeopardy once again. We just heard last night that Senator Joe Manchin of the coal state of West Virginia is again expressing doubt about whether he can support that $1.75 trillion reconciliation plan that has all the measures for social spending, but also for climate change. More than $500 billion of it actually would go to fighting climate change. And so, here the president is making promises, pushing other countries to do their parts, when some experts are pointing out that they are skeptical about whether the U.S. can even honor its commitments, especially if this plan is not passed. And if a single Democratic senator defects, if Joe Manchin or Kyrsten Sinema or anybody defects, the deal is dead. So I think you're going to be hearing a lot of Manchin's name tonight at the press conference, but it really is a free-for-all, Anne-Marie. I mean, our questions range from domestic topics to, other foreign policy issues, and there's a lot that the president has to answer to. And so it really depends on what unfolds the rest of the day and what people have on their own list of questions.
These summits, I think sometimes people debate as to just how valuable they are. And often we hear kind of lofty end goals. But when it comes to specific agreements, sometimes they fall short. And so, you point out that some of what the president is hoping to offer and hoping to sort of show the U.S. as an example, some of that's going to be held up in Congress. I wonder, what he was able to sort of hammer out, what sort of agreements he was able to come to here at this summit. Is there anything sort of concrete that's coming out of it?
The summit is still ongoing, and it's still going to be going on for several days after the president leaves tonight. And so, the big question is, will there be any framework, any kind of agreement to come out of it, which is hard to imagine because they're still trying to build on the Paris Climate Accord from 6 years ago and still trying to figure out ways to honor that goal, which is to zero out all global carbon emissions by 2050. And so that already in and of itself is a very lofty, ambitious goal. And I think, they're just going to have to continue having conversations about how to get there. And so I had an interview with the first ever White House climate advisor, Gina McCarthy, and asked if she expected there would be any kind of Glasgow agreement at the end of this summit. And she said that's the goal, but certainly, she can't predict that right now as these conversations continue.
We heard the president speaking there about the relationship between developing countries and developed countries, and that is one of the challenges is if the whole world is going to come together to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, then developing countries often find themselves in an unfortunate position where they're trying to grow their economy, but they're being asked not to use fossil fuels, cheaper fuels that poorer people would want to use. So, the president arguing that the developed world has to help, and he talked about helping South Africa shut down their coal mines. But I want to talk a little bit more about that challenge. I think of countries like India, large population, very poor population, that is kind of saying, hey, we need to lean into fossil fuels for now. Developing world, you had your chance, and now you're belching out all these greenhouse gas emissions while you're telling us to stop. Can we talk about that debate that's happening?
Yeah, well, India has pledged to try to curb its emissions, but I think the prime minister was really realistic. He did not commit to the goal set out in the Paris Climate Accord, that goal of 2050, instead saying 2070, which is quite a ways away because to your point, this isn't a light switch. They can't just turn things off, and they don't have the same resources that richer countries have. But I think the point that President Biden is trying to make is that it is incumbent upon those richer countries to do more because, and this is, I don't know if this is the exact analogy to use, but his point is when we refuse to do something, it not only impacts us individually as a country, but everyone else as well. Just like when he makes the argument for wearing a mask and saying that if you choose not to, it's not just about you and not wanting to put that on your body, but it's impacting other people around you. So he's saying it's impacting all these other countries because the entire earth is warming. And so that's why he is stressing to countries like China and Russia and Saudi Arabia to do more. But the question is how you get them to actually make commitments. And so when I spoke to Advisor McCarthy, I asked directly, whether diplomacy was enough. And she acknowledged that no, it's not. So obviously, at some point, if these countries are unwilling to make commitments to try to do their parts to reduce emissions, I think the U.S. and other countries could band together and put more pressure in other ways than just talking about it.
I want to talk about your conversation with the White House National Climate Advisor, Gina McCarthy. As we've mentioned before, both China and Russia, they're not present there, though China present, I suppose, virtually. They're both sort of in the top 10 when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, with China at the very, very top. I want to play a little sound from the White House Climate Advisor with the interview that you had.
I have faith that China will come around, but we know that their goals right now aren't sufficient to be able to address their challenges.
Is diplomacy enough?
No, probably not.
So then what's the alternative?
It's continuing to look for ways in which we send economic signals about what products we want to buy and what we expect in those products.
Is she suggesting that you need a stick to go with that carrot? What can the U.S. do to bring these countries to the table?
So I asked her if that specifically meant that there could be more tariffs down the line for the goods that we import from China. And she was not ready to commit to that, but she said that the State Department certainly has that as another tool that they might be able to use down the road to put more pressure on China. So I think, they have to be realistic, but they also have to maintain a working relationship with Beijing because it is the biggest polluter in the world. It has the power and the ability to cut some of these emissions. The question is whether it will or not. And so we have to see. We have to see whether they're willing to come closer to what's in the Paris Climate Accord, because right now China and Russia have rejected the goals.
We will have to see, and all of us collectively crossing our fingers. Weijia Jiang, thank you very much.
Sure.